really appreciate you coming. I think one of the great things. I mean, when I first moved to New York, one of the ideas was that New York is a place where you can find a lot of artists to talk to. And I can say over the last 50 years, I have not talked to enough artists yet. So I appreciate you all coming. Let me see. I guess I should say that I guess the first thing what I wanted to say is I have about 5 things to say, not particularly related to each other. I sat down many times to write this out, and I had so many things to say that I couldn't make them all work together. So, first of all, I think I should probably say something about the title of the show. It's called Cardinal Directions. And just before the show opened, Naomi put out an email to the gallery members, and she was trying to think of how to name the show. And so she put out just a question to the membership, and I mean, she got all kind of answers. And it's actually one of the wonderful things about being a member of a co-op, because you have everybody on your email list, and you write one note and you hit send all, and you get all kind of answers. And I think we've all probably troubled with how to name our work. You know, you don't want to be too specific. You don't want to be too general. You want to be somewhere in between. And there are lots of strategies. And I realize my strategy is to try to give a thing an ambiguous name, or one that has 2 or more definitions. So I call this show Cardinal Directions. And in the sense of Cardinal Directions, its most basic, most often referenced definition is the 4 directions of the compass. And having grown up in New England and have walked out in the woods a lot, I lived in an area where literally you could walk out of my back door and I could walk 7 or 8 miles in the woods without crossing a road. So very early on, I was very much aware of orientation, where I was. And I don't know why I developed this, but throughout my life, I've always had the habit of knowing where north, south, east, and west is in the environment. I mean, that's north, that's west, that's east, that's south. I don't know if anybody else notes that, but if I go in a room, and the worst place in New York City is the subway, because then you really get screwed up. But at any rate, I subsequently heard that there was an Aboriginal tribe in Australia that lives in a pretty featureless area, and their greeting to each other if they pass in an area is, "Which way are you going?" So anyway, so in a certain sense, I was always very much aware and wedded to where I was and how I was oriented in the space. I don't know if anybody knows, but I wrote a book, and it's sort of an adolescent adventure story. But what I didn't even realize I was doing in the book, if you look at it, there are hundreds of references to the compass direction. That the book takes a great deal of attention to where the reader is and orienting the reader. And I know myself, we've all read novels where the writer will try to give you some direction about where they are or what a particular orientation is, and you realize you get no idea. It doesn't help. Anyway, so as a kid I was fascinated with maps, and in a sense it's a kind of control. To know where you are every time. I remember having an overhead view of my family's yard, and I knew from a very small child I could see my whole yard from overhead, where the house was, where the garage was, where the neighbors were. And I remember moving out in concentric circles from maybe 5 years old, 6 years old, and each one of those concentric circles was a different pattern. So the point is that I've seemed to, and I don't understand why, developed a deep need to know where things are in a very kind of three-dimensional sense. In a sense, with sculpture, that issue becomes knowing how a thing is put together, where it is in terms of view and the distance you're standing from it, and how you're perceiving it in that way. And another aspect that I thought of in that range is that knowing, making a thing is a way to possess it, to understand it. I think of like the paintings in Lascaux on the caves, and those beautiful antelope and those buffalo. I mean, I can assume that the people who made those thought that they were attractive to look at, but I also have to kind of assume that they wanted to get they wanted to understand that beast. This was an animal that they lived with and that they interacted with as hunters. And by making a picture of something, you can get a certain power over it. And the extension of that, I would say, is if you think of something like the Willendorf Venus or any of those small Venus figures, mostly they're carved out of ivory or something, they're kind of like palm-sized. And I would submit that the person who made that wanted to understand those forces of nature, the fecundity, the fertility of women. And one way to understand it might be to actually make an image of it and then to hold it in your hand. And I think that's a very powerful force. It's one of the reasons I think that led me to make sculpture, to move in that direction. So over the years, I've developed a sense for what makes a piece work. And I think maybe because I was a figurative sculptor, I developed a sense of form that seemed to come alive. And there is a thing if you're modeling the figure, doing a portrait or a head or a figure, there's a certain strategy, there's a certain kind of thinking that develops the form with a sense of pushing out from the inside. I would say probably the first 100,000 years of human image making was figures that were arrived at largely in that sense. The sense of the form sort of pushing out from the inside. So I called that initially, the thing had to arrive with a sense of felt life. And over the years, as time has gone by, I came up with another interpretation, is that these things arrive with a sense of innate authority. So I think when I'm working in the studio, a piece begins to work when I'm thrashing around with these elements, trying to attach them together, is when it begins to sort of tell you in its own way that it has a reason for being there. And when it resolves itself, the better it resolves itself, is it arrives with a certain kind of, when you're in the room with it or when you're in the space with it, it validates itself. It has a certain kind of validity, and it reinforces your sense that you should be there. And I think all good paintings, all good visual art somehow has a sense of authority, a sense of rightness about it. A dance performance, you just feel it that way. Another thing I wanted to just talk to you about, and this is a very big part of what I'm doing, is that we live in an age where we know so much two-dimensionally, we get so much information two-dimensionally, that I think a deep felt three-dimensional sense of how to live in the world is to some degree diminished in us. We see so much, we have our video screens, we have our movie screens, we have television, and we see in two dimensions, and to the point where I just was reading an article about Andy Goldsworthy, the British sculptor who lives in Scotland. And it occurred to me, they were talking about his work, it occurred to me that most of you know who that is. He goes out into nature and he rearranges natural elements in very, very beautiful ways. And they're really captivating. I mean, they're just really exciting. But it occurred to me that there's a very exquisite irony in there, is that the vast majority of what you know and what I know about his work, we've seen only in photographs. So we live in a world where, you know, where this is less significant. And there's the old joke about, I heard it many years ago, I'm calling it an old joke, where somebody asked the painter what sculpture is. And they think for a minute, they go, oh yeah, it's that stuff you bump into when you're backing up to look at a painting.
That's Barnett Newman.
Huh?
That's the Barnett Newman quote.
Who is it?
Barnett Newman.
Barnett Newman.
Yeah.
There you go. Well, you know, I would submit from when the time I heard it in art school, probably in the 70s, to this point, that's kind of a working definition of what sculpture is. It's anything that's not stuck on the wall. And I don't know about you, but I have been to shows where the artist took two canvases and put them together like a book and called it sculpture. I mean, you were supposed to look at the paintings. They were not painted on the other side. They were raw canvas and stretcher. And yet this artist insisted that they were sculpture. I mean, literally, in my discipline as a sculptor, anything that isn't stuck on a wall is sculpture. And so what I wanted to do with this work, and it's actually my starting premise, the get-go premise, is that it's going to be three-dimensional, utterly. That you will need to see it from all around, and it will sustain a worthy your attention in a justified way. And I deeply want to deliver that to the viewer, that I'm not going to cheat them, you know, and do it kind of flat. And I think we live in an age where a lot of stuff, I mean, like, David Smith, I think you can look at a great deal of his work, and I would submit to you, if you go to a museum, you should take a look, that really resolves itself, or at least the vast majority of his attention was spent on the front or the back. I have a picture of which isn't to say that I don't think he's a great sculptor. I guess I should hasten for the people who like David Smith, and I do very, very much. But he himself once said he belongs with the painters. Should have had this more handy. Oh, here it is. So I was recently, we probably all know this piece, right? It's called Australia, right? Mm-hmm. And I was once, not too long ago, at a talk by Michael Brenson, and he was talking about David Smith and sculpture. 95% of the time pictures were up on the screen, it was this image. It was from over here, maybe a little over here. It was on a dock looking at some water. And I would say that you can go to the Whitney and view this piece. And if you walk around, if it's here, hey, good to see you. If you walk around to the side, you realize that he didn't really spend that much time looking at the end view. Now, which isn't to say that it's not a great sculpture or very important and worth a consideration, but it seems to me it doesn't really confront what you might call the dictionary definition of what a sculpture is, a thing that exists in three dimensions, unless you realize that it's something, if your definition is that if you bump into it, it can fall over and kill you. I mean, if that's your criteria for what sculpture is, I think that's reasonable. At any rate, so I really work very hard. I lay down on the floor. I have step ladders. I stand up on the step ladder and I look down. And I think it's very important to control these elements in three dimensions. To see it that way, to look down, to look up, look across at it. And I hope that that comes across as in a certain satisfying way. The other thing that I struggle with a lot is that in all these images that we see online, we're not looking at sculpture with two eyes. Now, they've demonstrated back in the 19th century, they did studies, and it's not hard to construct an experiment, you can imagine. They determined that peripheral vision to judge something in space doesn't work beyond about 30 feet for human beings, the way our eyes are set up. Beyond 30 feet, you look for things like size relationships, overlapping, maybe atmosphere a little bit. We judge distance by that space. So 30 feet away, let's say that sculpture almost over at the door, I'm really not seeing it like I am if I'm looking at this one right here. And I really work at them at this range. I step back a lot to see if the composition works as a whole, but basically I'm usually at this arm's length. And I like it because it does two things. It allows me to get a sense that the thing has a dimension other than what's presenting itself to me in that way. And I get to engage both eyes. Now, I don't want to seem didactic or professorial, but what I would submit to you, and you don't have to do it here, but if you look at something like your hand, and you look at your thumb, and then you look at your little finger and look at your thumb, you'll see that you see a double image and then a single image. The eyes switch off, and it's sort of like so natural for us to do it. You can do it. I mean, you can do it if you look at the wall over there and hold your finger up in front of your face. You see two fingers. When you focus on your finger, you see one. You get two, and then one. Am I right?
You're right. You're always right.
My notion is that is it's so natural, it's so inborn, it's so ingrained in us. I have a 4-month-old granddaughter, and I was looking at some videos where we were talking on what was it, FaceTime? We were on FaceTime with her mother, and you could see this little infant playing with the focus of her mother's face. You could see her eyes, that she was looking into her mother's face and trying to pull it in somehow. At any rate, it's so natural to us that it's sort of like asking a fish about water. It's just, we do it automatically. But the fact of the matter is that when you're standing here looking at it with both eyes, I personally have a sense of much more a sculptural sense. Both eyes are working. Perhaps there's some areas that are out of focus. My center of vision is drifting around. I'm seeing things slightly in my peripheral vision. My point is that it's a much richer three-dimensional experience than taking a photograph of it. The problem with the photograph is it's one eye. And what the photograph also does is it basically makes everything on one plane. And everything is as important as everything else. There are elements that literally go out of focus in your vision. So in an era when we're living with so much two-dimensional imagery. I mean, I myself, I've spent hours on computers. You know, before the show came about, I think in the last 2 months, I think Monica and I were just wedded to the computers and to each other. We did. Huh?
Happy Valentine's Day.
Yes. So anyway, I just wanted to say that's a very salient thing in my sculpture. The idea that they have to be truly three-dimensional, and that they're meant to be seen in an intimate relationship. Which isn't to say I don't think they look good, they don't look bad across the room, but I really would like people to live with them Because I know myself when I live with sculpture, I mean, we all do it. You see it differently. You catch it in a different light. Incidentally, another thing about the Andy Goldsworthy sculptures is as beautiful as they are, he picks his light for every single one of those. I mean, there must be times of the day when they don't look quite as good as when he photographs them. But I'm not saying they're not art.
He was trained as a photographer.
He was what?
Trained as a photographer.
A photographer.
Yeah.
Well, getting, great photographs.
Yeah.
But I mean, no, I know I really like his work. I seek it whenever I find it. I mean, it always attracts my attention. But I've really only seen two in situ, out in the situation. And there's the one up at the Storm King, the wavy wall. And then we saw one in the St. Louis Museum. The museum's in a big park, and in an angle of the building, in the corner of the building, he built this marvelous stone grid that goes slightly below the ground and opens up the space. And but those are the only two that I've ever seen.
The one at Glenstone?
Glenstone.
The one in Maryland?
Glenstone? I don't know. Anyway, I thought the real wonderful thing is the one in St. Louis. They must have a lot of raccoons because the whole top of it was covered with raccoon droppings. And no one had gotten in there with a broom to clean it off. It was just, the raccoons had had a circus in there. The last thing I was thinking about that I would like to say is that when I started doing these pieces, and I tell the joke all the time, it just bores me, but these pieces have the smallest carbon footprint that you could possibly have. A piece of paper has a bigger carbon footprint than these, simply for the fact that I cut them off the tree and drag them into the garage and let them dry for a year. So that, except for my labor, there is no investment in fossil fuels or anything else to harvest these. But I didn't really start with that idea in mind, that that was going to be a big thing. I mean, there's relatively little material involved. But over the years, I realized that, when you look at plants and you look at trees, you realize that they're built with a very elegant sense of economy. The trees have ratios in terms of their width to their length and proportion, in which they slowly adjust to their environment, to the atmospheric and the weather conditions where they are, and that they balance. They don't put any more energy into into growing than they absolutely need to survive in their environment, whatever their survival strategy. And if you look at almost any tree, its structure it speaks a great deal about the environment when you consider it. Those amazing baobab trees in Africa that look like barrels, they have those big bases because they store a lot of water. They happen to live in an environment where water has to be stored for them to survive. So it's basically a survival strategy. So just in terms of an environmental statement, not necessarily that I'm saving a great deal of wood here, rescuing a great deal of wood. I realized that there is some significance to the idea of paying attention to the natural world and the way the natural world grows itself, builds itself. And incidentally, those along those lines, that thing on the base way over near the door that's stacked, those are toaster tongs, and I'd like you all to take a pair. I make them out of scrap lumber that I pick up incidentally, all these bases are from recycled material. The Upper West Side is generous that way. Anyway, so please take a pair. And that's basically the core of what I wanted to say. I'm sorry I couldn't string it together in some kind of flowing narrative, but yes?
You did string it together with flowing narrative. I'm going to now throw something into
Please do.
narrative.
I can talk more.
So I think of your work as kind of markings also. They all have, each one has its own characteristic marking. What is your thinking behind not combining the thicker with the thinner?
I don't know. I have their heart. Well, for example, those pieces play with that a little more. And I consider there's a variety in here. And I played around with ideas where there was a piece in my last show where I was actually using those long, slender sticks with little geometric elements embedded in it. So it's kind of what the material tells me. That thing stuck up on the wall over there tells you a lot about the kind of thinking that goes into this. Those are kind of like what I have stuck up on the wall in my studio. And I'm always fascinated by that. I don't know how many of you have had the situation where something snaps your head around in a glimpse. You know, the double take, you know, you're walking down the street, you go. And I've always been fascinated by, what's that? What did my brain see that got my attention? Why did I see this thing over here, a crumpled coat, a pair of old shoes that are stuck in a drain pipe somehow in some kind of strange configuration? And I think it's always because it somehow evokes a sense of structure, and for me, structure is basically the subject of these works. Nothing happens without a relationship of parts. That's the definition of sculpture, is a relationship of the parts to the whole.
That's structure.
So you can have, in a sense of structure with two elements, but the more complex things have just more interest. So I'm always sort of seeking structure, but does anybody else have, you stumble onto things with that sense of a glimpse? Why did that, I mean, I know you do, Ralph. You see it all the time, because we talk about it. But I've always been fascinated by that.
Yeah.
Oh,
That's what we
okay.
do. Hunt for that.
Yeah. I just wonder what that is. Why is it so compelling? Why do you see one thing, and how do you, I mean, and also I'm fascinated with peripheral vision, because I don't know if you've ever played around with it, but you really don't see color or shape in your peripheral vision. You see largely movement. I was one time, many years ago, a friend of mine was playing tennis. We were laying on a lawn. I was laying on the lawn. And he was like over there in the tennis court. And I was laying on my back looking up at the sky. And I could see him. I could see him moving. And yet I didn't know I could not see any detail. So there's this very strange peripheral thing, which is also incidentally something that I think is kind of valuable to us, something we lose in our digitally generated imagery. You see so much talk about, we can make a 3D image on a video screen, but the fact of the matter is, it's not truly the kind of visual three-dimensional world that we actually live in. So, yes, Diana.
Yesterday, when I was here, you were talking about verticality.
Oh,
And I
right.
thought that was really
There was a note.
Well,
Yeah.
okay.
What I realized, and if you look around, you'll realize that these things, in a certain sense, not all of them, are about verticality. There's the four directions of the compass that tell us how to measure geographically where we are. But I realized as a kid that there was another dimension, and that was up, and conversely, of course, down. So that's, there's east and west, which are basically the same direction, just going different, same line going different ways.